Good everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So, in my last episode, I talked about how to create a product model, which will help you to insert your data, right? So, let me maximize it. So, this is what we, excuse me, this is what we've done in my previous episode. So, if you haven't watched any of my integration series, I would highly encourage you to check it out because I've covered enough around how to consume an API. So this course, what I'm going to teach today is a continuation of what I've been doing in my last episode, right? Okay, so what we're going to do, so we have created a base class and we have created a product controller, we have created a parser, and we have, as you can see that, we have used the parser here. So what we're going to do, we will be going to create a batch class, right? Because obviously you wanted to import the data from a third-party API in a batch process because that's an assumption I'm going to do because I assume that you might get 10,000 records or 20,000 records so in a first instance. So for keeping that into consideration, I will be using a batchable approach, right? So we're going to create a batch class today, and after that I will create a schedule class to schedule it, right? So that will sum up the entire consuming integration part. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about how to write a test class, right? Because that's very important when you develop any sort of any kind of Apex class. It should be backed up by a test class. And I will talk about best practice, right? How to create a test data factory and kind of stuff, right? Because it's very important you understand how to write a uh, best code, right? So that it's easy to maintain. As you know that I always talked about it, right? Because for me, code is it's an investment, right? So if you're writing a code, right, it's like you invest like in yourself, right? So you buy a food, you buy good quality food, and and you help your body grow. If you're a bodybuilder, for instance, you always try to eat clean. You always try to, stay away from alcohol. You try to, get a proper sleep. So if you use the same context, right? If you use the same analogy, right? Salesforce org deserve to have a good quality code going inside it, right? So why should you put a bad or shitty code, right? And so that org started to act funny when you try to do some kind of modification in the long run, right? So that's my main motive behind to teach you right how to write a best code. Okay, that's enough about writing today. So let's jump into the code. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a batch class. Okay, so I go to File. From next time, I will be using Visual Studio Code, but I just wanted to be consistent, so I'm going to use Developer Console to teach you guys how to consume the API, even the writing the test class. Okay. So I'm going to go new Apex class. So we say product can product in product batch. Um, okay, so product batch. So now, you have to, when you write a batch class, right, you have to keep a few things in consideration, right? First of all, you should not write your business logic within the batch class, right? Because this is not the place where you should be writing your business logic. That's the reason why I've created product controller, product model, right? I explained. And another thing, you have to make this as a global, yeah? And then you have to implement using two interface, right? First is called database dot. If you do interface, intelligence, it will give you that option. So okay, batchable. Okay, now let me. I'll come back to this part in a minute, right? Because it's more than just writing database dot batchable because there is one aspect you have to pay special attention to. So I'll come back to it in a minute. So let me add one more interface. That's database dot allow. I think it's allow callout. Okay, right. So The reason why I wanted to use the database to allow callouts because we are consuming using an API. So that's the reason why I'm using this. Okay. All right. So coming back to database.batchable, right? So this is very important, right? Because it actually tells you what exactly you are, what, the things you're going to work with, right? If you're doing a SOQL query, let's say, if your batch is all about getting a information from a SOQL object, let's say, if you wanted to update certain accounts, right? So what do you do? So you do select ID, name, whatever, right, from an account. So that's a part of an S object. So if that's what you're going to be working with, then you should put S object here, right? You do something called S object. Um, but in our scenario, this is not the case, right? Because we are not expecting an S object, right? Because we are expecting a map, okay? So that's the reason why this product controller is important. So we are expecting this return type, right? So this is what you should be passing to your the product batch. So let me copy this, yeah, and I'll put it here, okay? So this is exactly what you should be, because this is what we are dealing with, okay? All right, so that's nice and simple. I know it can get confusing if you are starting for the first time, but please stay with me. I'll try to make sure that you understand before we finish the session today. Yeah? Okay, sounds good. Right, now, so we are getting an error here because whenever you use this kind of a code, right, where you say implement database, excuse me, dot batchable, your code expects that you should be implementing three methods because if you wanted to know, database.batchable is an interface, right? So whenever a class implements an interface, you're making a contract with an interface saying, look, I will deal with every aspect of your code. In other words, if an interface contains three methods, then the class which implements the interface has a responsibility to implement all those three methods, right? If that makes sense. Okay, so in this case, database.batchable contains three methods, so we have to implement it. Okay, so it's a contract you sign. Once you sign a contract, you have to abide by that, right? Okay, so I'll explain to you what I'm doing in a second. So please don't get overwhelmed with my code. Um, so this is very powerful feature. Um, if you're doing a batch update. See, the thing is that my main intention is to make you guys a brilliant developers, right? So that you can write a perfect code. I mean, it's a relative concept, the word perfect, right? But what I meant by that is so that you can write a good code, which is easy to maintain, right? That's all I'm after. So that your company don't have to reinvest a lot of money to fix the crappy code someone else has developed, right? So I sometimes don't like the developer console. So that's the one thing, but that's okay. We deal with it for now. Batchable, batchable context, yeah. And I'm gonna do BC. Okay. Now, if you look, this execute, right? So execute is a method, right, which expects two params. One is the database.batchable context, and the second one is the list. Okay. Now we are not using a list here, right? We are using a map, so we have to do a bit of tweak. So we're gonna do the list stuff here, yeah, and we keep this skeleton as such. And there's one more method we have to implement, that is the void finish. So this code get executed once the start and execute process is completed. So I will explain to you how the process works behind the scene. Um, okay, so it won't save. I'll tell you why in a second. So we got an error here. Yeah, it's so typical that we get it. Okay, the first thing is that I was trying to write something, and the cursor went to the wrong place, and Okay, so that's sorted, the first thing. Okay, so that's great, right? Now, um, so, okay, let me see if this is where we are. Okay, we will, um, so we'll deal with that, the line number 8 in a minute. So the problem what we're getting here, if you look at it here, unexpected token. Okay, that's fine. We will deal with that in a minute, so don't worry about it. Oh yeah, sorry. This is because of this. My apologies. Okay. Right, sounds good. Okay, sounds perfect. Right, now, the reason why it's complaining, it contains no return type, right? So that's fine. We'll sort that out. So what we do here, we create a global private variable. So we do private list. Okay, so we copy this boy here. And you'll be surprised how simple the code gets once we implement this change. That's the reason why I've written a separate, data model, sorry, product model and product controller. So that your batch class don't get cluttered, right? I hate when people write entire business logic in a batch class. That's just a garbage code because this is not the place to write it, right? Because if you wanted to test it, it gets extremely difficult to test it. So, I believe in separation of, you got a separation of concern, right? So that means that you got to have a separate layers for things. I'm an old school, so my apologies if that's not something you're after, but you know, but okay. So the list, right? So product dot. So I this is a global a private variable I created product list because this list product list will be used here. Yeah. So that's why I've done this here. Okay. Now remember I created this one, the product controller. So I will use this to get me the list of um, uh, list of this products and I'll and which they put it in this map. Okay, so what happens is, right, when you run this batch class, right, the start code get executed first, right? So what we're doing now in the start method, we are actually building our data set, local data set, right? So the how we're building a local data set, so it's pretty straightforward. So if you look at this product controller code, so we are doing a call out, right, an HTTP control call out, right, to an external API, so which is like an external product API.product, so which will return us the response, and then I'm using a parser to parse it and to parse it in such a way that I can reuse it elsewhere, right? So I'm passing it and storing in a map of map, right? So that's exactly what a data type. And in the product model, I'm using that map and working on my logic to insert the record in the brewing, so the brew product. Okay, so that's simple, right? Okay, so we haven't done with this stuff here. Okay, so what we do here, so we have to return, yeah. So we have to return a this one, this, and so we have to return this. Okay, so now we're gonna do this dot prod list. Okay, let's see if it works first, then we talk about it. Okay, so that's worked. So what we're doing, right? Um, so this is like a hack I've done. So the reason why I'm using a hack here, as you can see there, right? So this part, execute the second parameters, only accept the list, right? And we are not returning a list here. We are just returning a map. So we get just one in a blob of a map. So So as a hack, I created a list of map and I put the value to the list because we only get one item of the list, right? So that's exactly what's going to happen because this is going to return the map of map and it's just a one blob, whichever way you wanted to imagine, right? One data set. Okay, bunch of a data set. We have product name, ID, right, quantity, and whatever. And so that's one data set, and one data set get pulled into the product list.add. So the list contains only one item, right? We are not getting a three data set so that the list to contain three items, right? So that simplifies it here. So we've done this stuff here, okay? So what we're gonna do, it's always a good practice to check if, right? So you have to check the list size, right? What if the list is empty, right? So if the list is empty, you're gonna get an exception. So if you don't check it, so it's always good to assume that your code will fail. Okay, so we're gonna do product model dot, and we're gonna do insert this one here. Okay, and we do here. Just gonna do a list, and there's always a first item. Okay, that's all we have to do as far as the batch is concerned, right? Now, you might be wondering, why do I have a finish method? Finish method is used, you can put a message here, right? Just for consistency purpose that, I can put finished processing. So usually this part of the code, right, line number 19 to 22, it get executed at the very last stage, right? Means to say, once the start kicks in, then the execute part get executed, right? This line number 11 to 18 get executed, right? First, this part of the code get executed when this batch code runs, right? And you get all the data set, and then this part of the code get executed. Then this one, the finish, is usually, sometimes you might to send out an email to system administrator say the task is completed, or you might have some other stuff to do, right? Say you wanted to create another stuff when everything gets over, so you can do that in the finish, right? So for now, we are not doing anything, or you wanted to capture the errors what we got and email to a system administrator, you can do that here, right? So that's the different options you can do. Okay, so we done this. Okay, let me save this, and then we will run it just to do a testing, because it's very important you test the code. Okay, so what we do, we go back to the so this is called brew. Oh no, sorry, not this one. Right? Okay, brew products. Okay. So let's see if it contains anything, right? So right now contains pretty much nothing, right? Okay, that's great. So we're gonna run this code. So we go to the debug console. So this is an old batch account, if you remember, one of the batch sessions long time ago I've done. So okay, so we're gonna do p. Okay, we're gonna do new, gonna do product batch, right? So we're gonna do database dot execute batch, right? So this is how you can execute the batch. So we say, I was going to say 10. Yeah, I wanted to run 10 entries in a data set. So database.execute batch is the way, is how you actually execute this run batch, right? So I'm going to show you how to do that using a schedule class. But for now, this is just for a testing, right? Okay, so I'm going to execute it. And it's going to take, so you can even look at other places to see how your Apex code is running. So if you look at, I'll give you one of the example in a second, where you can see exception happen. So you go to setup here, okay, and you go to Apex. So the reason why I'm taking you here, so that you can see the status of your batch job, right? So go to Apex job. So it says completed, right? So if you look at other stuff, right, the batch account, see there's an exception. So what happens sometimes, your batch code runs and you get no result whatsoever, right? So this is the best place you can have a look. Or other way you can do, right, you can create a custom object, right, and you can store the error information to the custom object. That's the one way you can also look at the way you can see the error. Because for a user, right, you have to understand from a user perspective. Users most of the times are not technical people, right? So your design, your solution should always include the user experience, right? Because that is very important. If you don't include the user experience, then the entire operation or entire exercise is pointless, right? Because that's the most important thing, right? Any integration you do, right? It doesn't matter the code based or a non-code based or you're using a flow. You have to always consider user experience into consideration, right? How a user will approach. Like for instance, say for instance, if I'm not a technical user, right? Let's say I'm a functional user, right? Or I'm an operator, right? Who been working on a different system and I've decided to migrate to Salesforce, right? So first of all, you have a lot of challenges to convince the user to move to Salesforce, right? And now on top of it, if you're developing a solution in such a way it's so complicated, it gives no importance to user experience, then you can think about user frustration, right? So that's very important, right? It can make or break a solution acceptance level among users, right? Okay, so keep that into consideration. So the reason why I'm telling you, because you will encounter this kind of scenario, and the user will comes back to you and say, "Look, this solution is shit," because it's very difficult to use, and the different steps are doing different ways. So please pay that thing into consideration. Okay, so it's completed. Yeah. So let's go back here and refresh it. Voila! Right, your product is here. You can see stout quantity. So we got 6 products, right? That if you remember, it only contains 6, so that's why we're returning 6. So it's worked. Fantastic, right? So now the next task is we gonna create a schedule class. Okay. So we're gonna do new Apex, yeah, and you're gonna say product schedule, yeah, and we're gonna do so as usual, like the batch, make this as a global, yeah, and it has to implement an interface that's called schedulable, right? Implements schedule level, yeah. And now, as usual, when you implement an interface, a class is forming a contract, right? So it contains a method called execute. So this class has to implement that execute method. So we can do void execute um, schedule level context. I think it's context sc, yeah. And this code, right? What we did here, we have to do it here, okay? And Control A. All right, so that's done. Fantastic. Now we have to schedule it, right? Right. For instance, you want to schedule, let's say 2 a.m. Every 2 a.m. you want to pull the data. You can do that. Okay. So what we're going to do, go back to your org, go back to your setup, right? So I hope you know how to do the setup, right? So go to gig icon, setup here, and go back to, so type Apex here, yeah, and then go to the Apex classes, okay. And this is a very amazing place where you can where you can schedule it, right? It's an out-of-box functionality, okay. So as you can see, there's a button here which calls Schedule Apex, yeah. So go to click on Schedule Apex, and you can say product schedule. Come on, schedule, and you can do copy this one, go here, okay. When do you want to start? Today. And when is the end date? Maybe 6 years down the line, yeah. And prefer start time. So let's say 2 a.m. Yeah, it's gonna take. That's pretty much all you have to do, right? As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. So what we've done today, we have created a batch class, right? The purpose of the batch class is to um, get the data from an API, insert into the beer brewing product object, right, which is a custom object, which is happening behind the scene. And then we created a schedule class, which will schedule this batch, right? Which called the demo batch behind. Sorry, what's that called? Demo, not demo. What's product batch, right? So product batch behind the scene, and it will do whatever it's supposed to do, right? So that's pretty much. So as you can see, look at the code, right? So let's look at the code what we've done, right? So now the next task we have to do the test class, which I'm going to do next time because it's very, very important you write a test class, okay? Unit test. So we create a product controller, right? So what is a product controller? Product controller is a gateway or an entry point, right? So if you look at the product batch, this is an entry point, right? So this is what gets us the information. This is what goes out and say, hey, give me the product. It calls an API and brings in the product for us, and it also does the parsing for us, right? So what we get is the parsed data, which so that we can use it. And then we have a product model which is responsible for inserting the data to the Salesforce, okay? So which we are doing in an execute method, right? So you can see the batch code is pretty clean, right? We don't have any business logic here. You can easily test it, right? Or if you wanted to test this, right, you can test this product controller. If you wanted to test the execute part, you can this execute part, you can test the product model, right? So this is how you can do batch code. Excuse me, I'm not saying this is the best way to do it. This is one of the way to do it. And you can improve, right? You can always look at the best design practices out there, right? So I hope you enjoyed today's session. And so this will mark our coding part as far as, I mean, I understand that tomorrow I have to cover the test class, but in general principle, we have covered how to do using a code. But that being said, code is not always the best option, right? So I always insist that code is not the good option. If you can do using flows or process builder or using external services or using Salesforce Connect without code, you should look at that route, right? So I mean, people who comes to me and say, "Look, I wanted to use a code solution first," I straight away tell them, "Do you even understand how the Salesforce platform works?" Right? Because you have to understand the Salesforce platform, right? There are a lot of things you can do with our code, and that's the way you should approach it, right? If your customer says, "Look, we don't want a code," and if they're willing to pay for the extra time, yeah, go for it. But if they're not willing to pay for extra time, then it's your responsibility as a consultant or an architect to tell them, right, look, this is going to cost you more over the long run, right? And we don't have developers in the house. If you're going to look after yourself, once we handle the code, that's your problem, right? But you have to be respectful to a customer at the same time because you got to understand that customers may not know how the Salesforce works. They have always a good intention. They want to have a system which is easy to use, right? So you have to understand from a customer perspective, right? Most of the customers are very, very nice. They're very they will understand what you're trying to say, right? If you have to manage the expectation, that's all it's about, right? So yeah. So that being said, I hope you guys have a great Saturday wherever you are, right? Greetings and adios from New Zealand. Take care. Cheers.